All right, we're back. I want to wrap up talking about infant attachment strategies and transition to talking about adult attachment strategies. With the conditional strategies, what I mean by that is if you move away from security and you begin to employ insecure strategies, so these are conditional based on the environment, what the care is available. There, what ends up happening is that you're essentially finding that hyperactivation of the attachment system or deactivation of the attachment system is more useful, it's more adaptive. And then if that gets reinforced, it becomes rigid, and into adulthood, you shift into using that strategy without even realizing that you're doing it or that other strategies exist. I want to make an exception here with secure people. One thing you may find is, and this is kind of funny for the work I do when I talk to people, when you're secure, what you find is you can seamlessly and fluidly shift in from secure um, conditioning or essentially secure strategies, that's really what I mean, to moving towards more distant, withdrawn, cool strategies, so ones employed by avoidant people, or you can get more emotional, more intense, hyperactivated, similar to preoccupied people. Here, the distinction is with secure people, they're able to do it flexibly. And I often get this response, or sometimes the feedback I get, a lot of people I work with are preoccupied. I'm coming from native secure conditioning myself, so when somebody comes at me with intense, involving, hot energy, it's only natural to be a little bit more distant, a little bit cooler, to shift into avoidance. So even a secure person, when somebody comes at them with intense preoccupation, it's natural to want to have some boundaries to protect yourself. That doesn't mean that the other person, right, if you're preoccupied, might feel like everybody else is avoidant. Everybody is dismissive and just tries to shut you out. What you don't realize, of course, is that your own intensity, your own hyperactivation leads to that response, and it makes it very hard to track your own experience and how you essentially caused that to happen. And then similarly, when I work with avoidant people, they tell me I'm too intense and I'm too emotional. So what they're experiencing is because they're distant, withdrawn, cool, I'm usually trying to get them engaged and activated and curious about their experience. To them, that feels like essentially uh, I'm coming at them with preoccupied energy. So, in the same way, a dismissive, secure interaction, a secure person, even in that situation, will try to get energy up, to get activated. So, act in a low level preoccupied way. So, that's really the distinction here is secure people do use the various strategies. You have the full repertoire and you can use it flexibly. So, when you need it, you can cool off. When you need it, you can heat up. And with insecurity, the major distinction is that you're really just stuck, you're rigid in these insecure patterns. You can't really shift out of them. And you might not even have awareness. That's one of the things that is quite strange is that when you hear it all fleshed out and you realize, oh, this is a pretty accurate description of my own experience, then it becomes obvious you're not the only person that relies on these kind of strategies, that it's actually one way to deal with this attachment dilemma. And one thing about using these conditional strategies, the insecure strategies, is they actually give you the best chance at feeling some felt security. So it's not full security in the sense that the child in these circumstances is not fully confident of their caregiver because the caregiver is not showing up quite right. So for an avoidant person, they're essentially there, they're present, but not engaged. And with a preoccupied person, they're there, but they're multitasking. They're distracted, or they're intrusive, they're misattuned. So the best that an insecure person can get is this pseudo felt sense of security. And then with secure people, they actually have a full sense of felt security, meaning that they're confident their caregivers will show up in times of distress to comfort them and settle them, and the caregivers will also be there to encourage their exploration. And the difference here, and it really feels like, sometimes I get people that describe they have friends where it feels like they're just live in different worlds, where it's like, I didn't realize that somebody could have a completely different childhood, and as an adult basically have you start in a totally different spot. So what they notice there is that secure people, when they get unsettled, sometimes they don't even need to, right? That infant, if when they're young, they don't always even need the caregiver's proximity. They just need to know they're available. So what that looks like is, you might have, if you're around children, you might have seen them. Sometimes they hesitate, they look back. If you make eye contact and you let them know you're available, that's enough for them to continue, for example, with their exploration. And they just keep moving along, keep doing their thing. I'm not talking about that every time anything happens, you pick them up, you settle them. It takes a long time, a lot of energy. What ends up happening is that cycle gets condensed and generalized. So there's this broadening of that conditioning. So the child begins to internalize this experience and realize that no matter what, my caregiver will be there in these circumstances. And then they don't actually need their caregiver as much. So it would really take a more intense experience for them to need to rush back, to ask the caregiver to pick them up, and so on. And what that creates is, connecting this to emotional regulation strategies, in secure children, this creates a large window of tolerance. So the window of tolerance is your ability to tolerate emotional experience, to go through life. With insecure people, they tend to have a narrow range of insecure or of tolerable emotion, where they basically get dysregulated by, say, your favorite flavor ice cream isn't there, or there's a little bit of traffic on the way. Things that are relatively mundane can be extremely painful and dysregulating. So the window of tolerance is small, and also the emotional regulation skills are not as developed. There's not as many of them. Because secure people essentially keep building up, scaffolding up this haven of safety and secure base, they need, in a way, less, because they're dysregulated less frequently. Their capacity to tolerate intense emotional experience, whether negative or positive. That's one thing about the distress tolerance I want everybody to know about, is that I think majority of people know about the negative experiences that are dysregulating. You get overwhelmingly frightened or sad, and then you need somebody to help you re-regulate, or you need some way to re-regulate through auto-regulation, for example. But in the same way, positive experiences can be intensely overwhelming too. So for example, say a wedding, a birthday, birth of your child, something very exciting, a promotion. Those things can bring you to tears and really make you also feel overwhelmed. And insecure people struggle with both ends, because there's not a lot of positivity. When you are being met with positivity, say from a secure person, it actually feels quite unsettling and uncomfortable. And it's not that there's anything inherently wrong with that experience. It's just that it's so new, and the window of tolerance is so narrow, that even that joy, the delight, whatever's coming at you, doesn't feel so good. It's almost like part of you feels like, yes, this is really good, but I'm also somehow overwhelmed. So experiences can be quite conflicting, and also easily push you out of your window of tolerance if you have insecure attachment. And this confidence that secure people have in their caregivers really sets up the paradox of the attachment system. The more confident you are in your caregivers, the more independent you can be. So secure people end up being the most independent. In a previous video, I was discussing that in the strange situation, children play the most. In the same way, secure adults also spend the most time exploring, and they go much further in the exploration because they stay within their window of tolerance. If they get knocked out, they have more emotional regulation capacity. And then if anything really does knock them off track, they have their close group that helps them re-regulate. So what you end up seeing is that by even your mid to late 20s, the secure peers are in a completely different place in their life than the insecure people, especially disorganized. With disorganization, it's really just a matter of trying to get on your feet, off the ground, to get a start. But things hardly ever go anywhere because any amount of difficulty, challenges usually knocks you off and you have to start over. Whereas a secure person, that might not even have registered. That's one thing you have to realize about the window of tolerance is most of the time when the experience is just within your window of tolerance, you don't even notice it. It's only when something intense enough happens that it registers, then you know you're dysregulated and you need to regulate that experience. So I hope this connection makes sense and how the attachment system functions, and also how when the attachment system is on, the exploratory system is off. It's all about settling, haven of safety. When that happens, the exploratory system turns on. And the exploratory system, this is what I want to focus on a bit more now, is it's oriented towards complexity and novelty. So, people are very curious. I think that's one of the kind of built-in functions which speaks to this exploratory system. We're tinkering, taking the world apart, investigating, seeing patterns, constructing stories. So that curiosity is what allows us to create the complexity we see all around us in our world, right, where things are going. And the interesting thing about exploration, obviously, anything can be exploration. That's one of the things is it's what has meaning to you, what's interesting to you. The stimuli has to, right, light you up personally. It's not what somebody else tells you. Eventually what you're going to find, no matter what the exploration is, eventually you're going to reach a point where you've exhausted that pursuit. Meaning that probably everybody here has had the experience where you pick something up, something new, and in the beginning it's very interesting, very complex. And then as you begin to take it apart and master it, the challenge level drops off, the novelty wears off, and the experience becomes mundane. So that's what we mean by the exploration system. You have to keep searching, you have to keep exploring, and you want to keep multiple tracks of exploration open at all times because eventually whichever exploration you're doing, it will dry up and you need to pursue these other things. We're limited by our time and resources. So at any one point, you may only have one major exploration and then say a few hobbies, a few things you're looking at. And then say the main exploration dries up. You can put all that new time that you have because the other exploration went away into these other ones, and then you find new meaning and you explore that. So over the course of a lifetime, a secure person can explore many, many different tracks or go very deep in one direction. And what you're going to find is you have to keep either increasing the challenge level to maintain it or looking for novelty. So one thing you can do is go for depth, meaning that you really go deep into something, and that can continue creating novelty and challenge. Or you can change directions in the same exploration, or just pick up completely new exploration. If you're constantly picking new things up and not really fully exploring them, what you're going to feel is the sense of dissatisfaction, that you didn't really get what you were looking for, the meaning. And this is a hard concept to translate into words because it's so experiential. You know when you have meanings, when you struck gold. I wonder, most likely everybody here has felt that, where you just know, yes, I'm doing something I was meant to do, or I'm doing something that I've always wanted to do. It is just the felt sense of it, and you can use that to navigate. So a secure person can pick something up and look for an exploration and then realize, you know what, this isn't quite what I hoped for, and then just drop it. There isn't this sense of obligation that I must drudge along in this pursuit that has no meaning to me. And with this insecurity, the main challenge with the exploratory system is that it doesn't really develop. With secure people, because the attachment system is settled, the exploratory system is fully on. When the attachment system goes on, they can resettle. With insecure people, there's a chronic sense of anxiety. The exploratory system, for example, for avoidant children, is not fully on. So it's a pseudo-exploration. They don't fully explore things. And as adults, what ends up happening is they actually use exploration as a way to have means or have resources. This is quite different. It's not so much about the meaning the exploration provides, it's about the goods it gives you or the status it provides you. And then trading that and essentially bargaining in a way to get something from other people or something from the world through the position you gain, for example. And then preoccupied people hardly explore at all. So being a person, having a strong sense of self, which is a prerequisite to explore, it's kind of a chicken and the egg situation here. What you find with secure people is they have a strong sense of self, and that strong sense of self allows them to direct their exploration and go far in it. Whereas a preoccupied person has virtually no sense of self, and I don't mean that in a good way where a lot of people I know are meditators, and when they hear no self, they think, oh, that's the goal, or that's one of the very important steps in meditation practice. This is actually quite different. This isn't a good experience. It's this hazy, lost, confused, absent sense of self, a very weak sense of self. And the way the sense of self develops is through exploration, because preoccupied people's attachment system never settles. They don't actually spend hardly any time exploring. And exploration creates the sense of self is reinforced, and then more exploration creates even a stronger sense of self that you can put into that behavior. It's like a feedback loop. Secure people can do that really easily. So what you get a sense of when you meet them is their self experience is strong. They know who they are, and that comes across. They know what they're about and what they're looking for in the world, their contribution, their impact. With preoccupation, it can feel like when you're interacting with somebody, it's like, who are you? Is anybody even there? There's a lot of oscillations and changing your mind. And it's like, what's your main pursuit, or do you have any pursuits? So again, I don't want to create this sense of blame that there's something wrong with the preoccupied person that they did. It's really a sense of compassion, because they didn't get enough support. Their attachment systems stayed on always. It's hyperactivated. And because it can't shut off, the exploratory system never really turns on, and the sense of self is weak because of that. So I want to talk more about how the exploratory system is reinforced by the caregivers. When there's danger, infants seek safety. It's the caregiver's job to create a safe environment. That's the foundation of settling the attachment system, allowing you to explore. It's pretty much impossible to explore as a child when you're in a dangerous situation. Most children's natural inclination in these scenarios is to cling to their caregiver. When the danger passes, then you can explore. That's another way your exploratory system may never come online, is that you grew up in a dangerous environment. And really, in the worst cases, the danger is not even the environment, it's the caregivers themselves. So then the child has to not only completely deactivate their exploratory system, they have to gear their attachment system towards detecting threats from the caregivers. There's this constant hypervigilance. What state is my mom in? What state is my dad in? Or even siblings. The siblings could be a threat too. And with the insecure strategies, there's this paradoxical presentation often. For an anxious ambivalent child, they're being asked to have the caregiver pick them up. And often the way they do that is they just collapse into just a helpless pile. Basically, they say, I can't do anything. I need you to show up. And say in that moment, the caregiver does show them up. And the moment they're picked up, then the child shows their anger. And that really encompasses the two sides of the preoccupied spectrum, the helplessness and the rage. And then, as opposed to the anxious ambivalent child, the anxious avoidant child actually is in a constantly deactivated state where they're close by to the caregiver but not directly interacting with them. And you may think, when I'm describing all these experiences, if you ever watch The Strange Situation with different attachment styles, the infants, the caregivers, why did they behave like that? Why doesn't the infant just say, I want to be picked up, or, I want to play, help me play and explore, I'm curious about this, let's play together? Why don't all infants just do that? Well, what you see is that, for example, with an anxious avoidant child, if they do that, this is in an experimental setting where the parent knows they're being recorded. The parent may lash out at the child and mock them for wanting that closeness. In the same way, the preoccupied parent may completely lose track of the situation and get distracted or multitask, misattuned to the child. So the child does try. They just learn that it doesn't work. It's hopeless. There's not much here. So they make do with what is there and they make the best of it. So if that means deactivating and going into anxious avoidance, that's the best strategy in that situation. It's actually adaptive. And same way, anxious ambivalence, the hyperactivation where you're actually able to elicit more care from a parent that has a hard time noticing the child and activating, then that's the best strategy. And then when you come out of it into adulthood, what you realize is that, oh, these strategies aren't so helpful, especially when you realize there's many different kinds of people coming from different families and households. You want to be able to shift your attachment system towards security so you can utilize all the strategies in a flexible and fluid way. All right, so I want to finish the insecure discussion of infant attachment with disorganization. So with the disorganized attachment category, not only is there conflict behavior, which I've talked about previously, there's also dissociative behavior, so the child may freeze or they may spontaneously just eyes glaze over, their body goes limp. So these kind of things happen, and then the caregiver may elicit and present in the very similar way. So the caregiver may also have a dissociative episode, or they may not only just misattune, say like an anxious ambivalent parent, they may actually be threatening. For example, coming too close, getting in the face of the child, or just, you've probably seen this where most parents or a lot of parents just naturally tend to get to the child's level because children are so small, right? If you were to come up to them and really stand tall over them, it's actually kind of not only uncomfortable for the child to look up, it's also threatening. It doesn't feel so comfortable. With disorganization, you may see parents do these kind of behaviors, and sometimes it's unconscious, sometimes it's a way to assert their dominance, and other times the parents are just checked out. They've abdicated their parental role. So the child, when they look for a stronger, wiser person, the parent says, "That's not me. You're on your own." So here, the attachment system, none of the strategies work. The secure strategy doesn't work. The avoidance strategy doesn't work. And the ambivalent or preoccupied strategy also doesn't work. So what ends up happening is they actually use bits and pieces of different strategies, say an avoidant and an ambivalent strategy, and at certain times they may switch or even simultaneously use both strategies. And the way that manifests is the conflict behavior, this approach avoidance behavior where the child rushes to the parent and then freezes and tries to avoid the parent. And it's very confusing to see. In low risk samples, this category is not particularly relevant. There's virtually no disorganization if you're white, middle class, educated, all of that. But for high risk samples, this is the most relevant category. I think in the original study, 85% once they switched to high risk study groups, 85% of the parent-child dyads were disorganized, as opposed to something like 60% secure, and then the other 35% insecure, 5% disorganized for the low-risk sample in the original study. So the numbers get flipped pretty quickly. I'm reminded when I used to work in rehab, working with substance use, I remember people would share about their own lives, how they grew up, and what a person thinks is normal can be drastically different from person to person. What I mean is, I remember somebody describing their own life where they were traveling, the family was traveling along with a band. Following along, there was high levels of drug consumption, partying, and severe levels of neglect. And this person basically described that as, don't all children grow up like this? Isn't this pretty normal where the parents behave in this way? And of course, this may seem apparent to you, right? Not everybody grows up this way. But if you had a particularly severe and difficult childhood, you may think that's the norm, that all parents are like this, all families are like this. And then if you grew up in a secure household, you may think that, of course, all parents are helpful and considerate. How else could it be? So there's this sense of not only normalizing the attachment conditioning, but also realizing that there's many different ways you can be brought up into this world. So now I want to talk about a few more specific cases of disorganization. So as the category in infants was being developed, what they were finding was there was actually different types of disorganization. So not only did the children show these conflicted behaviors, the approach avoidance behaviors, there were also some children seemed to be more punitive, so punitive controlling, and then some children were actually taking care of the parent and what they later called caregiving controlling. So there's these two sub-classification of infant disorganization. And the punitive controlling you can think of as the child. They're both types of role reversal, where the child essentially acts like the parent or the adult in the relationship. The punitive one is the child says, hey, you better get your act together and step up and take care of me in a better way. And there's anger coming from the child towards the parent, and it's directive. It could be, don't talk to me. You need to sit up and clean up, or it may sound comical, but there's recordings of this, and The child is very harsh and structured and telling the parent what to do, and the parent does it. So the parent gives up their stronger, wiser position, and the child leads and tells the parent how to take care of them. And then the caregiving controlling um, subclassification of disorganization, the child actually is overly sweet and says, oh, mommy, you had a hard day at work. Let me take care of you. Do you want a glass of water? Do you want me to rub your feet? And it may seem sweet to an outside observer, but when you look through it through the lens of attachment, it's obvious, again, the same theme of role reversal. And what the children are doing in both these cases, the punitive and the caregiving controlling, is they're trying to get better care for themselves. And they're also putting off the negative affect, the intense feelings they don't want to feel. So the parents' feelings intrude into their own psyche. So by either taking care of the parent or pushing them to do other things, it helps them deal with their own anxiety. What happens with disorganization is not only is the attachment system on, what other system is on is the fight or flight system. So you can think of it as a simultaneous activation of the attachment system, and because attachment soothing or that experience with the caregiver often meant that the caregiver was frightening or you needed to fight back or freeze. There's a simultaneous activation of that system too. And it makes it virtually impossible to settle. When you ask a disorganized person what their level of anxiety is on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest level, 1 being fully settled, they usually say something like 7 or 8, and that's chronically there, meaning that day to day, at any point, they're hovering anywhere from 6 to 8. So it's really, really high levels of anxiety. And that's what happens when your fight or flight system is essentially always on. Not only does the attachment system not settle, you also have the fight or flight system simultaneously on. And then there's other forms of disorganization. Just for brevity and the sake of time, I won't go into too much detail. You have other attachments, you have the attachment system, you have other systems that are there. Some of them are latent or develop later, for example, the sexual system. And you can think of just the most straightforward attachment as, right, you have the attachment system, you have the exploratory system. Those are the two main systems you have to consider. With disorganization, what ends up happening is it's not only the attachment system, it's another system that gets simultaneously co-activated with the attachment system. The basic case would be the fight or flight system. Another case could be the sexual system. So if there's cases of various forms of abuse, right, the caregiver who's providing care is helping settle the attachment system, but is also perpetrating abusive behavior, that could turn on another system. Or it could be the aggression system, where you're both needing to, not only wanting to settle, but you need to fight. So the aggression system turns on. So you can think of other unusual pairings, and the way it usually presents is you may feel both frightened and unsettled, and then suddenly you may feel aroused, and it's almost simultaneous. Or you may feel the same way, right? You don't feel safe, and all of a sudden you are filled with anger and adrenaline, and you're ready to fight. So disorganization is really a completely different level of complexity and difficulty to resolve, and the presentation of it can widely vary. So how about now you're getting a sense of the attachment system, attachment strategies, how it all works, connects with emotional regulation. And at this point, I've talked enough about the infant assessments, the strange situation, and infant categories. And now I want to transition to talking about the adult categories. And With adults, in order to assess their attachment, because it's at the symbolic level, it's not directly measured like you can in a strange situation where you just see how the children act. You have to go to the symbolic level, representation level. So there really is an internal working model, and it's abstracted from the attachment system. So when the attachment system goes off in an adult, right, the first response for most adults that I know of is not to rush to their mother or their primary caregiver, a parent figure in this case. It's usually something different. It could be quite elaborate, and it could be really distant from the experience of the attachment system. So it might be, I'm going for a run now. I had a hard day at work. I'm going to go for a swim. Or it could be, I need my partner the moment I walk in from home to give me a big long hug, and we need to talk for a little bit. So the presentation can really vary, and it's not just simply proximity seeking and emotional regulation in these observable ways. The way Mary Main, and this is her brilliance, and to this day, this is still considered the gold standard adult attachment assessment. She was able to develop a system called the Adult Attachment Interview with her graduate student, Ruth Goldwyn, in the 1980s. And this is an adaptation of Mary Ainsworth interviews she was doing during the strange situation and the direct family observations. An adaptation of that, and Mary May structured this interview into essentially a series of 20 questions that takes about an hour to administer to the primary caregiver. And what she was able to do was connect the infant attachment style assessed in the strange situation to the adult attachment style. And what she found was there was 84% correlation between child and primary caregiver in their attachment styles. So a secure child, right, if you assess them secure in the strange situation, if she did the adult attachment interview and scored it for the attachment classification, she would also find secure classification almost always. And in the same way, anxious avoidance became avoidance or dismissive attachment style in adults. There's slightly different language between the strategies used by children and strategies used by adults. And then the anxious ambivalent category, the resistant became preoccupied in adults. And then disorganized is still disorganized or cannot classify, which is a form of complex disorganization. The brilliance of the adult attachment interview is that it assesses different types of memory systems. So adults, as you grow and develop, you have episodic memory. So when you can easily recall an episode in your life, and usually it's stored in gists. So just almost like a summary. And not only that, you can basically say, this is approximately what it meant. And memory is not very accurate, so depending on how you're feeling in that moment, you may tell one story or have one meaning one time and another meaning at another time. And that is actually stored in a different memory system, which is the semantic memory. And those two memory systems need to be integrated. And language bridges the gap between the memory system. So as you go from unconscious processing, which you have, procedural memory, which is unconscious, and other memory systems, as they all integrate and connect into conscious expression like language, if there's good integration, it all comes together and makes sense. So the story you're telling and the meaning of it come together in a coherent way. The other thing to know about the adult attachment interview is there's different types of questions. You can think of them generally as request questions. So can you tell me about certain things in your life, versus demand questions where, why do you think this happened? Why do you think things turned out the way they did? And the interview itself is meant to activate the attachment system. Similar to the strange situation for infants, where it activates, right, the separation of the mother from the child activates the attachment system. The interview itself activates the attachment system too. And that's the whole point, is when you're assessing for attachment strategies, you're seeing how the person does when they're activated. A lot of people can be quite predictable or settled when they are settled, right? When their attachment system is off. But we're most interested in how do you respond, how do you behave under stress, under this activation. And of course, the activation isn't overwhelming. It's just the questions themselves. They help you just turn on the attachment system. And interestingly enough, I've done a lot of these interviews and um, scored interviews. At the end, the vast majority of people, even though it is activating to a certain degree, the vast majority of people share that that was a meaningful, profound experience because nobody's ever asked them these kind of questions, and they've never really had a chance to share about these parts of their lives. And just doing the interview itself, one of the measures on the interview is coherence and mentalizing. Doing the interview itself improves your ability to mentalize and have a coherent narrative. So my experience of it is actually it's totally worthwhile, and it's the most accurate way to assess for attachment styles in adults. And the other thing I want to mention is that for secure people, the interview is almost like a fun challenge. They realize from the get-go, they catch on quickly that they get what it's about. They get what they're doing. So it's two people, there's an interviewer and interviewee. Secure people, when they're being interviewed, understand that what the other person wants them to do. They're able to do it. They're also able to collaborate with the interviewer. So saying, can you clarify that? Or I didn't quite get that. What do you want me to do again? Oh, I lost track of the question. So there's this collaboration peppered throughout, and they're up for it. That's the sense I get with secure people, is they're up for doing this. And what they are able to do pretty consistently is they're able to tell highly coherent stories. So when you listen to it, it's like you're there, you get it. Okay, this is what happened with your parents, this is what happened with your siblings as you grew up, this is how your relationship shaped up, and it all makes sense. There's not a whole lot of gaps, there's not a whole lot of inconsistencies. So if you were to read it like a book or a novel, you would say, yes, I get it. I kind of know who you are, and I know where you come from, how you ended up here. And the other thing secure people do well is throughout the interview, they show metacognitive awareness. So their speech is peppered with metacognitive remarks. Say, for example, um, when they misspeak, they correct themselves, or when they say something and as they say it, they realize, you know what, that's actually not quite what I meant. I realized when I said this, I'm going to change that. What I mean is this. So there's this active monitoring of their experience. Obviously, in the interview, it's the speech, but it extends to all parts of their experience. They monitor their felt sense, their emotional experience, their cognitive experience. And they're also monitoring the interviewer. Oh, this person's reacting like this. Is what I'm saying not quite right? Is that not what they're looking for? Let me clarify that. So there's this collaboration, coherence, metacognition. And under these stressful conditions of the AI, because it does activate the attachment system, secure people are able to just maintain all of these qualities. They're able to do it. It's not a struggle for them. But for insecure people, what ends up happening is they automatically default to these insecure strategies, and they're not able to really course correct or get out of it. What you'll see is with, for example, anger preoccupation, this is a sub-classification of preoccupation, is they'll go on these enraged rants completely unmonitored, where they'll just blast somebody, usually a primary caregiver, with anger, and it could have nothing to do with the interview or the question being asked or what's happening. It's almost like a tangent into this rage. So that's what I mean by automaticity. It's just like the metacognition turns off and the default strategy that's underpinning, right, that's there. When the attachment system turns on, you get to see it play out. So that's what happens. And coming back to secure people, the other thing they do well on the interview is they actually, the sense you get from listening to them, talking to them, is they value attachment. They understand that there's this thing called attachment, not at a conceptual level. Here I'm fleshing it all out. What I mean is that they value people and relationships, and they see how you have a place in the world, people help you settle, you help others. So there's this underlying sense of valuing attachment. The other thing they have is they tend to be quite forgiving and compassionate of their parents. Typically, they don't describe their parents in only glowing terms. They may say, my mom struggled with this, or my dad, dropped the ball here, he didn't show up, or something like that. And they know it was painful, and it's something they can talk about it. They also have a sense of forgiveness, realizing that, my parents also had a lot on their plate, or at that time, their parents were ill and they were taking care of them, so I was deprioritized, and, I get it. I now I have my own children, and I can see how much you have to do. So compassion, forgiveness, empathy, balance. It's not too good, it's not too bad. They're able to be aware of their own experience, aware of the other's experience. That all comes through the interview. The other thing that comes through is a strong, lively personality. I've already talked about this. Secure people tend to have a strong sense of self, and that's really apparent. Interestingly enough, the secure interviews, when I do them, the presentation is all over the place. These interviews are the most unique. There's a lot of fresh speech. There are things I've never really heard of. So interview to interview, it could be completely different. It's like the possibilities are just wide open. You get a lot of diversity. Whereas with insecure interviews, they tend to be actually quite limited. It's like, yep, there's the idealization or derogating anger, there's the involving speech, and so on. So it's almost like you're just shoehorned and limited with insecure speech. And security allows you to have all these possibilities. So I guess at this point it would be good to discuss what avoidant people do in interviews. Okay, let me end here, and I want to share more about the insecure adult attachment strategies and how those play out. And then for more information, if you're interested in services, interested in more classes, you can find out more information at mindfulattachmentcoaching.com. All right, thank you.